Alright, welcome to the channel. My name is James, and with the release of Skaventide, I thought this was the perfect opportunity to share with you how I plan to paint my Stormcast Eternals. I'm looking to create a rich bronze armor with a heavy patina to create a simplified TMM effect. So, let's get into it. And this is what we're going to be painting up today. I wanted to create a simple process that allowed you to create an elevated, weathered TMM bronze. Now to paint this, you're going to need a few different colors. You're going to need Warplock bronze, Hashut copper, Sycorax bronze, exhaust manifold, dark aluminium and aluminium, some Abaddon black, Incubi darkness, Kabalite green, Hykey yellow and Nihilakh oxide. All the paints will be listed below in the description along with the Games Workshop equivalents. So we're going to kick this off with a small dry brush from Artis Opus. We're going to use that to stipple on that Warplock bronze. This will create some texture and additional information within the armor and help add to that old tarnished look. Now we're going to follow up with some Hashut copper, and we're only going to hit the areas where the light is interacting with the armor. So you can already see where the light is reflecting off the metallic paints, and we basically want to put that copper color in those areas. Now this will help to create contrast across the model. It'll also create some shape and add some definition within the volumes. Now to really emphasize that highlighting pattern, we're going to come in with an extra small dry brush now so we have more control over where we're applying the paint. Using the Sycorax bronze, we're going to help to accentuate those different volumes, different shapes and different highlight patterns. So you can see I'm controlling where I'm applying this paint. This is quite a bright highlight in comparison to our dark colors. So again, we're adding in lots of contrast here to really emphasize that true metallic effect. Now you can see I'm even using the dry brush to help add in some edge highlights to certain areas and really start to accentuate those shapes, those edges, and create some really strong contrast. And even on these thigh plates, I'm using it to sort of accentuate that almost cylindrical shape that they have, that curved surface, by adding in those different lights and shadows. So whenever you're adding these highlights, do think about the different shapes within the model. Try to break it down to its like core shapes, those cylinders, spheres, flat planes and so on, and use this to almost start building up those specular highlights within those shapes. We're just going to repeat this process on the back of the model as well, looking to add that highlight towards the top of the head, leaving that Warplock bronze towards the bottom, and then accentuating some of those other shapes, doing exactly the same thing with the weapon. But really focus on those areas that are perpendicular to the light source, because they're going to be the brightest spots within the copper or that bronze color. We're then going to take some exhaust manifold and use that to block in all of the silver sections. So I'm using the silver around the trim and various details across the model. Now with the exhaust manifold, it should only take one, at most two passes to get a nice opaque layer, so do take your time whenever you're doing this, and try not to hit any of those copper sections from earlier. Follow up with some dark aluminium, and we're going to look to place our highlights in the same areas that we've been placing those copper highlights. Use that to accentuate the overall lighting pattern and highlighting pattern across the model. Now grab some Nuln Oil or your favorite black wash and just apply that over the top of those silver sections. Make sure to drag it towards the areas of shadow so again you can accentuate that lighting pattern and those highlights. Before applying the Incubi darkness, use some Abaddon black to tidy up any areas across the model. Then we're going to be using a size 2 series M from Artis Opus just to block in all of the Incubi darkness across the model. We're using this as the accent color or the complementary color to go along with our copper. So you can pick and choose where you want to put this, whether you want to add it to the shoulders, the weapons, the shield. Entirely up to you, but just follow the same steps whenever it comes to highlighting all of those areas. So your first highlight step is going to be a 50-50 mix of Incubi darkness and Kabalite green. Thin that down with a small amount of water so you can create some transparent layers. This way you can build up the gradients and build up the opacity of this color in multiple passes. You don't have to worry about glazing or trying to smooth out the transitions. Follow up these highlights with some pure Kabalite green, again adding a small amount of water so you get those transparent layers. Now we're going to be feathering this out towards the edge of the shield so we can create that gradient from the center out towards the edge. So do work to pull the pigment towards the edge of the shield. You can also use this to accentuate some of those lightning details within the shield as well, with some strong edge highlights around them. But be sure to build up the colour over 2 or 3 passes to ensure you get nice soft gradients and transitions between your mixes. And this finishes off pretty much the entirety of the first stage. We are now tabletop ready and able to play some games. And your model should be looking something like this. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that like. It really helps to promote the video and helps the channel grow. And if you're feeling frisky, don't forget to give that subscribe a wee slap and a tickle. You can also drop a comment below to help please the algorithm. Right, let's get to work on elevating this paint job. We're going to start off with a mix of Incubi Darkness and Abaddon Black. We're going to use this to push it into the shadows and create more depth and more contrast between the highlights and the recesses. This is also going to act as the foundation for that Verdigris effect that we're going to create across the bronze. So you can see I'm placing this in the darkest areas across the bronze. Only in the spaces where the Warplock bronze is still present, and even then I'm only trying to cover a small amount of it. This is also acting as somewhat of a bounce light or secondary highlight in the shadows, so we can use this to further emphasize the shapes and bring more of that three-dimensional look to the model. So you can see I'm really working it into those darker sections across the model, trying to move away from those bright highlights and create more contrast between our lights and our shadows across the model. This is to try and reinforce that TMM style across the model. So you can see the paint's quite thin whenever I'm doing this. It's almost like a wash consistency, maybe just a wee bit thicker. This allows me to build up the opacity over multiple passes and really control the build up of that patina and control the lighting and the reflections across the model. To start adding more colour into the shadows, we're going to take that 50-50 mix of Kabalite Green and Incubi Darkness. Again, we've thinned this down to that sort of almost wash consistency so we can build up this patina and verdigris over multiple passes. You can see I'm really getting it into those deeper recesses, really into those shadows, building it up with some stippling, some thin layers, creating some variation in the patina and in the verdigris. Again, we're going to continue to use it to emphasize certain shapes across the model. We're going to use it to accentuate the details within the face and create a wee bit more contrast in those areas. And you can see I'm relying a lot more on that sort of stippling approach to applying this color. This way I get some variation with the size of the dots, the different textures and different bits of information that we're creating across the model. It also complements the approach that we took whenever we were applying our metallic paints. And whenever you're doing this, think about maybe where some water or some moisture may be depositing or gathering across the model. Try to get it around the rivets into those deep recesses or separation points between certain areas or components within the model, and just sort of play around with the effect. But remember, you're always trying to emphasize that three-dimensional shape of the volume and use it as that sort of accenting color within the shadows. Do the same thing with the weapon. Again, hit the areas that are opposite to those bright highlights and use it to accentuate the different shapes and different components within the weapon. And now just repeat the process with some Nihilakh Oxide. Now I have thinned this down with a bit of water on my palette just so I can create those thin translucent layers and build it up over multiple passes. Now I'm going to be quite selective with where I apply this. We're going to really try to accentuate the deepest shadows and really try to emphasize the shapes across the model. And you can see there are times where maybe I've applied too much and I do wick that away with a damp brush. We want to be really controlled and really precise with how we apply the Nihilakh Oxide across the model. That way we can really control the build-up of this weathering effect and continue to build on that TMM finish. So once you've finished with the verdigris effect, it's now time to highlight up the rest of the details across the model. So we're going to use some Hykey yellow mixed with our Kabalite green to create some highlights across the weaponry or additional details on the model. The Hykey yellow just adds some additional warmth and vibrancy to the Kabalite green, but here you can start adding in some texture and some battle damage to various components across the model. We're going to be quite selective with these highlights and use it to emphasize the lighting pattern and the highlighting pattern that we've been using across the majority of the model. We're also going to use it to build on that gradient we created earlier on the shield. This time again you can add in some more battle damage, some scratching, some lines, and create some more additional detail within this area. Again, be sure to thin down your paints into translucent layers so you can build up these gradients over multiple thin passes. And always try to pull the pigment towards the edge of the shield so you further emphasize that gradient that we started earlier. And to finish off the bronze across the model, we're going to add some aluminium into the Sycorax bronze, or that might be some aluminum depending on where you're from. We're going to use that to accentuate the lighting pattern, really just add this in as the final brightest highlight across the metallics. Effectively this is the specular highlight. Now if you want to create some more weathering and some damage across the model as well, you can use this to add in some slashes or some cuts and different bits of detail across the model to give it that more battle-worn look. But try not to go too over the top with this colour, this is really just to accentuate the earlier work that we did. But again, you can see I'm adding in those specular highlights to the shoulder, to the head, to the chest, really picking out some of those key details across the model. And now last but not least, we're just going to create that TMM effect on the blade. Starting off with a base of exhaust manifold, we're going to be using some Abaddon black to glaze in the shadows. Now build this up over maybe 2 or 3 passes until you're happy with the overall coverage and the opacity of the Abaddon black. We're really just using this to add some shadows and some depth to the weaponry. So now we're going to use some dark aluminium to highlight up the weapon. We're going to accentuate those bright points on opposite sides of the blade to create more contrast against those dark areas. We're also going to use the dark aluminium to add in some scratches and some battle damage to make it look like our blade is well worn. And with that, there isn't much else to do other than pop it on a base, pop it on the spinny thing, and let's get in for that close-up. So I'm really happy with how this armor turned out. I think those rich, warm tones of the copper complement so nicely with those deep, cold tones within the Verdigris. Also using them to accentuate the three-dimensional shapes and components within the model helps to add more interest and detail across each of the components. But by keeping things simple, working with big brushes and laying colour down quickly in that stippling manner allows us to create a lot of texture and additional information across the model that we can then accentuate with that Verdigris pattern. Really helps to create a super effective and quick TMM result. I look forward to seeing how you apply this to your miniatures. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions for future videos, please drop them below in the comments. And if you want to show me what you've been working on, head on over to the Discord and drop some pics into the whips or the completed projects. I'd love to see what you've been painting. If you'd like to get some personalised coaching and tuition, head on over to the Patreon and check out the available packages. There'll be something there to suit everybody. All links can be found below in the description. Thank you again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you at the next one.